Hello, YouTube. Welcome to my presentation. It's called Before It's Too Late, a look at the history of Paradise Hills. Paradise Hills is a neighborhood on the west side of Albuquerque, but as you'll see as we go along, it's not part of Albuquerque, but it's definitely within the Albuquerque Metroplex. I'm a resident of Paradise Hills, and I'm going to cover the history of it from 1700 to 1975. This takes us from the Alameda Land Grant to the exit of the Horizon Land Corporation. Just a little bit about myself. I am a resident, been in Paradise Hills since 1988, a New Mexican since 1985, and I live in one of the first 6 houses that were built on Golf Course Road. I am not a historian, but I am an engineer, and I have a background in intelligence analysts for a good portion of my career as an aerospace engineer. But right now, I'm a STEM teacher. I'll be teaching at the Ask Academy in Rio Rancho starting in August. And history is not my hobby. I'm a toy train operator, been doing that for a long time. I love playing with electronics, and I'm also very much into movie and television science fiction. So, why did I do this? Well, first of all, it's a bit of a sentimental journey. I was a kid in Brooklyn in the 1960s, and I watched a lot of people moving out to the Long Island suburbs, including my aunt and uncle, who bought a very big model home in Northport. And it was great to visit them. They had this big house that was essentially in the middle of a forest. And I thought to myself, well, one day I want a house like this. And I did get one eventually, but maybe not at the right time. And as we all should ask ourselves once in a while, well, how did I get here? Like David Byrne says in his song. Uh, I just wanted to know a little bit about the neighborhood, but primarily I just wanted to know who built my house. And as you'll see, there are still lots of questions. Well, let's start out with the Alameda Land Grant. I'll take you back to the late 1680s. The Spanish were thrown out of the New Mexico territory after the Pueblo Revolt, and there were plans being made to go back in and take it back. To do this, the governor in Mexico City offered land grants to anyone who would go with de Vargas on that reconquest expedition. And that started in 1692. There's a picture of Diego de Vargas, and he was the one who went out and took the New Mexico territory back for Spain. In 1709, a man by the name of Francisco Vigil, who was living in Santa Fe, requested a land grant for his military service with de Vargas. And the governor of the time, Jose Chacon Medin Salazar y Villaseñor, approved the grant on January 2nd, 1710. However, it seems that Vigil really didn't need the grant or want it that much, maybe after taking a look at it, and he sold the tract for 200 pesos to a Captain Juan Gonzalez 2 years later. And I think with the value of silver nowadays, that might have been in the realm of $7,000, $8,000 in today's money. Well, the Alameda Land Grant, as you can see on this map from 1879, covered an area of land that went from the northern border near Bernalillo to approximately the west side of the Rio Grande. However, that border was a little fluid and at first included the town of Alameda on the east side of the river. One of the reasons the border was a little fluid is because the Rio Grande meandered a bit. So in the beginning, it was hard to place exactly where that boundary was. But the western boundary went out to the escarpment near the Rio Puerco, but ended just about where I would think where CNM West Campus is now, if not a little further west from there. The southern boundary was opposite what is now Candelaria Boulevard. So we're covering quite a bit of land, and it was a pretty good deal for about $7,000 in today's money. So we have a description there from the original grant of where the boundaries were, and the Gonzalez family in 1712 settled immediately after they were sold the grant. In fact, they were in the Alameda land grant. They were residents there for quite some time. Now, Gonzalez was smart in that he had the grant ratified by then Governor Mogollon in September of 1713. And because he went to the extent to have the right paperwork done and to have the grant formally conveyed from V. Hill to himself, that actually saved a lot of problems 150 years later, as we'll see. Now, with Gonzalez, there were quite a number of other people who moved on to the Alameda land grant, and it was a fairly large community. Primarily, it was members of Gonzalez's family, but also probably people who bought sections of the grant from Gonzalez. And to this day, there are open spaces in Corrales that were farmed by the Gonzalez family for at least 2 centuries. So remnants of the first Gonzalez family tract is still in place, even though it does belong to the village of Corrales. They've preserved it as open land. All right, well, let's go ahead quite a bit. Let's go about 120 years in the future. And after the war with New Mexico, after the Treaty of Hidalgo, it became obvious that the grants in the New Mexico territory that the U.S. had acquired would have to be reconfirmed in some way. Now, this was easily said, but it took over 32 years and 3 completely different regimes of government to settle the Alameda land grant. At first, in the 1870s, a surveyor by the name of General T. Rush Spencer, he found that the grant papers were genuine. His office surveyed the grant and recommended its confirmation by Congress. Now, again, this was during the New Mexico-U.S. territorial period, so you would assume that would be a matter of fact, but hardly. It hardly was. The grant remained in unconfirmed status until 1886, and then the Surveyor General, George Washington Julian, whose picture we see here, he re-examined all the paperwork. He noted that there was still some lack of evidence showing that V. Hill had occupied the land at all, but the confirmation of Gonzalez's claim was good. However, he recommended that the title of the grant be given to the U.S. government. Why? I don't know. Fortunately, that was never carried out. Who knows what would have happened to the title if the federal government had gotten hold of it. Well, the grant was reviewed a 3rd time by a group called the Federal Court of Private Land Claims, and a person by the name of Alejandro Sandoval sought confirmation of the land grant for himself and other legal heirs and representatives of Francisco Montes V. Hill, not Gonzalez. So perhaps Sandoval was a V. Hill descendant who wanted part of the claim. Lots of chicanery going on here with land claims in the West, and New Mexico was definitely one area where that was happening, as we'll see as we go. Well, the CPLC attorney conceded that the evidence, again, was still good, but it questioned the original ratification, probably was also going to question the conveyance to Gonzales, and also the western boundaries were not well defined for the CPLC. Finally, there was another resurvey by George H. Pratt in October of 1893. I'm not sure if he was with the New Mexico territorial government or with the U.S. federal government, but he did a resurvey and set the total acreage at over 106,000 acres. However, there were challenges by another grant and by the Pueblo of Sandia that reduced this amount slightly, but let's call it like 105 acres for the sake of argument. Records of those challenges do not exist. The main issue with the Alameda land grant and with some of the other Spanish land grants were what was referred to as the common grazing lands. This accounted for a vast majority of the grant. What would happen under a Spanish land grant is that a particular person would get the grant and he would have access probably to what was considered the best part of the land, but then a major portion of it was set aside as communal grazing lands, so that whoever lived on the grant would still have access to some of the grasslands, so everybody had a chance to raise cattle, which was a good idea because that would only give people a vested interest in the land, to keep it good, to take care of it, but it would also give more people the chance to acquire some wealth in this new region, this unknown frontier. Well, the ownership of that grazing land, however, would be challenged by many people and finally settled in a court case known as Montoya versus the Unknown Heirs of the Hill. Well, that's all well and good. Unfortunately, the problem was that this was going to be handled by gentleman, and I use the term lightly, Alonzo B. McMillan. He was a member of what was called the Santa Fe Ring. This was a group of politicians and lawyers who came to the New Mexico territory pretty much to steal whatever they could. And the members of the ring had become aware of the territorial legislature's plans in general. Not everybody was in on this, but most of the legislature was going to try to enact legislation for the governance of the land grants to make them more secure so that people like McMillan couldn't come by and just use whatever legal tricks he could to take the land. Well, first and foremost, he filed in the district court of Bernalillo on behalf of a plaintiff by the name of Vicenta Montoya for the partition of the entire grant. Montoya claimed to be an heir of Gonzales, the heir of Vigil, and she wanted part of the land along with all the other people who might have a good standing legal claim to it. But of course, that did not include the communal grazing land. Well, the District Court of Bernalillo had the job then to determine all the rights of whichever landowners were there and whoever wanted to lay claim to the land. Here's a picture of the Santa Fe Ring, probably sometime in the early 1890s. I can only guess that McMillan in his much younger days was in the middle there, but I will not swear to it. But that's a picture of the group that was known as the Santa Fe Ring. All right, well, let's go on. Almost a year later, McMillan filed an answer to Vicenta Montoya. And this becomes weird because he was the one who filed for her, and he answered his own filing. So at this point, McMillan becomes the representative, the attorney for both the plaintiff and the defendants. And although this seemed like a conflict of interest, both the defendants and the plaintiffs wanted the partition. So although in today's age, McMillan would have been thrown out of court, whatever judge was hearing the case thought, all right, everyone wants a partition, so McMillan can represent both sides and we'll all come to some agreement. Well, in March of 1907, there was a judgment for the partition among about 450 people, probably some heirs of both Vigil and Gonzalez, and most of the Gonzalez heirs were probably living on the grant itself. Then the trial court judge ordered the sale of the communal lands, probably established boundaries in that court, and the proceeds would be divided among the heirs who would get title to parts of the land. All right. But there were a great number of people living on the grant who were not heirs. And I'm assuming that because of the way this went, they were not part of the 450 people that the court ruled for. So these interveners, the people who were not heirs, they wanted their cut too, and they were more than entitled to it because they had evidence that they had been on the grant for more than 50 years, them and their families. And of course, with that type of claim, call it squatters' rights or what have you, or the fact that they might have had legal deeds signed by Gonzalez or his heirs, the court ruled in favor of them as well, and they were given portions of the lands too. But the remainder of the grant, which was the communal grazing land, was still the lion's share of the land that had to be settled. Well, McMillan and his heirs weren't satisfied. They thought that whoever these interveners were, even if they'd been on the tract for a long, long time, they didn't deserve any part of the land. And maybe, I'm guessing that the people involved might not have liked the boundaries that were called out for the communal grazing lands, or maybe they didn't like the idea of the lands going to public auction. Maybe they felt that the communal land should have been split up amongst the first 450. Again, there's a lot of these things that are not written down anymore, records that were lost. I'm just glad we were able to find some history of the land grant up to this point. Well, McMillan appealed the ruling to the New Mexico Territorial Supreme Court, and there we have a picture of William J. Mills, who was the Chief Justice of that court around 1902. Now, to meet all his arguments, all the obstacles of going forward, McMillan raised 6 points in his appeal, and each one of them was struck down. The court ruled against McMillan and the heirs, and the proceeding of the lower court would go forward. It should be known that the actual number of acres carved out by the interveners seems to have been around 10,000 acres. And that would have left just 75,000 acres, or 75,000 acres, not just, it was a good portion of the grant, that was left to be sold. So with this in mind, we're talking about 20,000 acres that was going to go to the original plaintiffs, which was, quote unquote, the unknown heirs of Vigil and Vincenta Montoya. Well, here again, McMillan wasn't happy about it, and he appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1914. And of course, at that time, New Mexico now had become a state. So the Supreme Court would rule on this as a state matter with New Mexico. And he finally was quickly overruled by an opinion written by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, whose picture is there. and he lost. He lost every challenge to the original ruling of the Bernalillo court. Well, don't shed any tears for him, because at this point, because of his legal fees, he had wound up owning a third of the land grant, and those acres were conveyed to his company, the San Mateo Land Company, in 1913. Uh, it's almost a sad story where a man who lost every case winds up owning most of the land grant. There was one last legal challenge by an intervener, but that was thrown out for whatever reason, we don't know. And the rest of the land grant was sold at the court-mandated auction for a sum of $15,000. And I'll give you one guess who won the land. Yep, it was McMillan's San Mateo Land Company. Well, now let's go on to the history of the Black Ranch and the Horizon Corporation. We left the San Mateo Land Company in about 1914. And then in 1929, about 15 years later, Albert F. Black and a partner from West Virginia, Guy B. Ray, decided to come to New Mexico, and they purchased about 20,000 acres of the land grant from McMillan's company, and this would include the future Paradise Hills and Ventana Ranch and Paradise West lands. This information was collected from an interview with John Black, whose grandfather was Albert F. Black. So there's a source you can trust. Now, at first, Black and Ray, they wanted to buy the land for oil and gas speculation. That never happened. And there was also some accounts that the San Mateo Land Company sold 55,000 acres to a man by the name of Robert Thompson. But the only evidence that could be found for that was actually just a lease of $1,000 to use Black and Ray's acreage for cattle grazing. So we're pretty sure that the first owners after McMillan's company was Albert F. Black and Guy B. Ray. Well, this is a look at the Black Ranch, and there is a copy of the territorial map that we've seen before. Black Ranch ran from the Rio Grande out near the Rio Puerco, and within it was 1,100 acres that became 7-bar development, 6,500 acres known as Quail Ranch, and in Paradise Hills, 2 parcels, first one being 8,500 acres, and the second being 4,500 acres. Here's a picture from the 1930s of both Albert F. Black and his son Albert J. Black farming alfalfa near the river. And as we'll see later on, after some interviews with both Albert J. Black and John Black, life here wasn't easy. Raising cattle on the west side wasn't easy, but at least they could grow the alfalfa to feed to the cattle when grazing wasn't that good, and it really never was that good. So along the way, about 12 years later, after Ray and Black came to New Mexico, Albert J. Black bought out his partner for $100,000. And as I mentioned, raising cattle on the West Mesa was very difficult, and even during the war, there was very little profit in it. So after World War II, Albert J. Black realized that he and his sons could not keep raising cattle or farming on that land. So Black quickly realized that westward expansion and the growth of Albuquerque made the land much more valuable to sell to developers. And also at that time, rising taxes made ranching even a worse proposition. So here's a cute photo from about 1943. And according to John Black, these cows and this pen and the horses, they're very much near the first hole of the Paradise Hills Golf Course. So that gives you some perspective of what Paradise Hills looked like going back to the 1940s. Pretty much open grazing land with some people living near the river. Well, Mr. Black was very smart, and in 1959 they were approached by a company called U.S. Land Corporation, and U.S. Land purchased 8,500 acres of land from the Black family, and then they formed a new company and called it Horizon Land Corporation, and they named that 8,500 acre purchase, and they called it Paradise Hills. This is a picture of the original warranty. But not so fast. We've got a hero in this story. And if any story needs a hero, this one does. And it is Albert J. Black. He liked Horizon's work in Arizona, but as a smart rancher in the West during this time, he was very, very weary of speculators who would cut and run. They would buy large tracts of land cheap, and then they would just cut it out, plat it out, and sell the lots for a good profit, but then would just up and leave the people who own the lots to their own devices. And if the local government wasn't strong enough or had really enough money, development would not go forward. Everyone would be left to their own devices to find water and fuel and whatever was needed to build a house. All right, but Albert J. Black was smarter than that, and he had two conditions for Horizon. First, structures had to be built contiguously from a central point, and that was the golf course in Paradise Hills, and water and sewer utilities had to be put in place first. So, because of his conditions, Paradise Hills did not turn into another cut-and-run land scheme. And as we'll see with Horizon Corporation, again, Albert was pretty smart, and he is, I would say, definitely the hero to our story. That's him and his wife, Mary Jane. Now, you'd be smiling, too, if you went from hard ranching life to being millionaires overnight. They sold Paradise Hills for $1.6 million. So let's talk about this suburban dream. What was Paradise Hills? Well, it was the idea of Horizon Corporation, but the man behind Horizon was Joseph Timon. And there is a street in Paradise Hills named after him. He is the quintessential immigrant success story. He was born in Poland, came to the U.S. in 1920, worked many jobs, earned money as a law clerk, and managed tenement buildings, and then finally went through law school and started practicing real estate law. And he was doing it at a time that made him a pretty smart cookie. He started his own real estate practice in 45. He retired in 57, which tells me he was doing a bang-up job. But once real estate's in your blood, you can't really give it up. And he set up Horizon Land Corporation from U.S. Land Corporation. And he started developments in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, with Paradise Hills being one of them, and some others, again, in New Mexico, but again, in Texas and Arizona, others as well. I won't go into those. I won't go into details. This is about Paradise Hills. So here's some original brochure artwork of what Paradise Hills was going to be. It was Timon's dream, or at least advertisement, that Paradise Hills was going to be a planned community. It would have homes. It would have the golf course. It would have a hospital. It would have shopping centers. It would have grammar schools, middle schools, high schools. It would have senior apartments. It would have other apartments. It would have just everything you'd want in a community. There'd be a 600-acre park. There would be a lot of pocket parks. Well, isn't that nice? Here's a more of a line drawing of the same plan. And again, it was a lot of promise. But to this day, nobody can tell me and nobody, or at least nobody, will fess up to whether this was a promise, a plan that Timon really wanted to carry out, or if it was just a big advertising spiel to get people to buy lots. Well, as any of you who are around here knows, any other residents of Paradise Hills knows, we got the golf course and that's about it. Everything else was either beyond the boundary of this map or it was set up many decades later. One interesting thing that was found in my research were plans for housing for the elderly, which was being held in the Special Collections Department of the Center for Southwest Research. These plans are dated 30 October of 1962, and I would be betting that these are the only surviving blueprints from the original Horizon development. And this was for a series of buildings that I think would have been built around the corner near Eagle Ranch and Paradise. And it was apartments for the elderly, single-story structures, living accommodations, simple living accommodations for low-income or fixed-income people. And it was designed by a firm out in Los Angeles for this development in Albuquerque. I have not found any other blueprints from Horizon, but I'm betting this was one of many sets of blueprints that were completed just to be part of this great advertising event to sell lots. At least Timon had blueprints of things that were supposedly going to be built. Right? The planned community was a definite part of advertising the lots, and nobody knows if, again, Timon was genuine about this or it was just a big advertising campaign. Well, here is the layout done by Guy S. Green and Associates, and yes, there is a Green Avenue in Paradise Hills. And what became of the development was the building of the golf course, obviously, but also several neighborhoods within the 8,500 acres. One would be called Country Club Estates, and that would be luxury homes around the golf course, all with unique floor plans. You buy the lot, you bring in your architect and your builder and build a house. Then there would be the Knolls of Paradise Hills, which was from Green Avenue east out to the eastern edge of Paradise Hills. That would include houses on Golf Course Road and houses on Green. Some aspects of the Country Club Estates in terms of the size of the lots, but only a few houses on Golf Course Road have a view of the golf course. And there are just two houses on golf course that actually are up against the golf course itself. The other two neighborhoods would be Executive Estates, which would be south of Paradise Boulevard and would go up against a escarpment within the Petroglyph National Monument that exists today. And there were even some houses that were built on top of the escarpment, I'm sure to the regret of the people who wanted the Petroglyph National Monument to include that. There's also, finally, the Rio Vista neighborhood, which would be to basically the west of what was then Lyons Boulevard, and somewhat to the east of it. And this would be your typical suburban development, reasonably priced homes on smaller lots, sort of like the Levittown of New Mexico. Some would call this an early example of urban sprawl. Why are we building all these houses so far away from Albuquerque when there's still more than enough lots in Albuquerque? So that was the dream, and now what was the reality? Well, here's some hard dates. On April 7th of 1960, there's a big to-do at the Alvarado Hotel, and Joe Timon announces his plan for the quote-unquote $50 million planned community on the west side. Someone should have asked, who's $50 million, of which the answer probably would have been, well, not mine, that's for sure, from Mr. Timon. Between April and June of 1960, work starts on the golf course. That went very slow. And on October 6th of 1960, the master plan for Paradise Hills was approved by the Bernalillo County Planning Board. And wow, what timing to have that plan approved on October 6th, because what happens real soon after that? It's October 30th, and it's the christening of Paradise Hills. It's the grand opening. If the birth of Paradise Hills happened in April, in October we had the christening of Paradise Hills. A big grand opening party on Sunday, October 30th, featuring then celebrities like Art Mooney, Dennis Day, James Gardner, and the Merry Macs. And there would be a cavalry charge, horses, carnival rides, the whole bit. Come and take a look at Paradise Hills and meet our celebrities and buy a lot. There's also be a free giveaway of a lot. And my guess is from some of the things I've been told by people much older than me who recalled some of the details, some of these celebrities were given lots as their appearance fee. Well, at first we need to sell the lots and build houses. Well, this is where one of New Mexico's premier builders comes in. A gentleman by the name of Coda Roberson, the owner of Roberson Luxury Homes. He starts advertising the houses he'll build in Rio Vista. And he's building, again, in the Rio Vista neighborhood, reasonably priced homes for the middle class. And his rule of thumb was $10 per square foot. So you wanted a 1,900 square foot house, you'd pay about $19,000 for that. Roberson built thousands of homes throughout New Mexico, and his company went on for many, many decades. It's not around now, but like I said, he built thousands of homes. There is a question on exactly which homes he built in the rest of Paradise Hills. Almost every home in Rio Vista up to 1970 was built by Coda, but he also might have built some of the homes east of Lyons, now Unser Boulevard. But the records of that are long lost, although if you walk around Paradise Hills, if you walk first through Rio Vista and then walk east of Unser Boulevard and look around, you'll see some similar architecture. So the guess is that he probably built some of the homes east of Unser, but exactly which ones, well, maybe you can tell by sight, but not by record. Another mystery is if he was one of the builders who started building around the golf course. Now, the pictures you see here are the first houses that were built off of the golf course, and these model homes are actually now in what I would consider a hidden place. They're on a street called Globus Circle in Fairfax that is just to the west of Golf Course Road. And these homes were built with much different floor plans on some very large lots. But again, who built them is a question that is not recorded. There's no records to answer that question, except in the lower picture on the left. That house has many architectural features that are common to a Coda Roberson home. So my guess is from this view, Coda probably did build homes in Country Club Estates, but again, you look in the MLRS records for the realtors, And for so many of these early 60s homes, the builder is listed as unknown. Well, the golf course, again, they started in 1960, but it wasn't open until 62. Why did it take so long? Well, according to one early resident who interviewed Albert Black, the golf course had to be seeded 4 times to get the grass to grow. And the main reason for that was whatever firm was building the golf course, they were not used to spring in New Mexico. The odds are if you put down grass seed in the spring, it would blow away. And that happened 3 times before they got smart about it. But in 62, they did open the golf course, and Albert Black was on the first board of directors for the Paradise Hills Country Club, which was the operator of the golf course. Of course, as residents know, that golf course has changed hands many times. And wouldn't you know it, as far as advertising goes, a movie didn't hurt either. In 1961, filming began for a movie starring Kirk Douglas, and it was called Lonely Are the Brave. It started out under the title of The Last Hero, and it was filmed on Horizon Land in Paradise Hills. It was also rumored that Douglas, to go into these advertisements and to move the production to Paradise Hills, he was president of the production company. He would get a lot, or maybe several, in Paradise Hills to do that. And what we have here is from the Journal in 1961. We've got Kirk Douglas saying how wonderful it is to make a movie in Paradise Hills. Well, try that again today, I dare you. But that was good advertising, I guess, for Paradise Hills back in 61. Well, at the start of Rio Vista, from some of the original residents who I was able to interview, most of the model homes, or rather all the model homes for Rio Vista that Coda Roberson built, were put on Essex Drive, which is near the fire station and west of Unser Boulevard. These were all the model homes. You could go there, take a look, buy a lot, and see what all the different ways Coda Roberson would build a house for you. And there was a grand opening for this in June of 1961. So building in Rio Vista got started very quickly. And one of the reasons it was developed fairly well in the beginning, although not totally developed before 1970, was the simple fact that people felt that even though Paradise Hills was fairly remote from Albuquerque, they were getting more house for their money, which, that sounded like a decent trade. And of course, commuting from Paradise Hills to Albuquerque in 1962 was a fairly simple thing, but you had to either drive north to Alameda or drive south to Bridge Street to get over the river. All right, well, again, we're looking at Rio Vista, both in 1970 and 1980. And it's interesting to note that even by 1980, there were still more than enough lots for sale. Rio Vista did develop, but it was fairly slow, and that can be said for all of Paradise Hills, except for the homes and the lots around the golf course. But even then, you'll be surprised to see that up to 1980, there were still golf course lots that were available. Within Rio Vista, it took a while, but the first commercial property did open in 1961, and that was the Rio Vista Supermarket. And the Rio Vista Supermarket would be there for about another 27, 28 years. The original owner or manager was a gentleman by the name of Ray Meckenbeer, and I had the opportunity to talk to his son. Unfortunately, there were no old photos or any records to be had. There was also the opening of Sierra Vista Elementary in 1963, At first, it was like many schools in New Mexico and definitely in the Albuquerque area. It started out using surplus army barracks and non-permanent buildings for the school. But by about 1965, the elementary school had a permanent building, and more than enough original residents remember their days there. It was a fairly normal school for its day, again, except for the first 2 years when it was basically a collection of old army barracks. All right, so very soon after that, in July of 1961, soon after Coda Roberson's big open house, there was an event called the Pageants of Homes, which was sponsored by Paradise International Corporation. Now, Paradise International Corporation was set up by Horizon to manage the development of Paradise Hills. And what this event would do, hopefully, would attract people to both Country Club Estates and the Knolls to start building homes, selling lots, obviously, and building homes. This is where things get really muddy because there were so many builders who advertised at the Pageant of Homes. And you can see the names of some of them here in this slide. Most of the builders were local to New Mexico. Some particularly worked in Santa Fe, but there were several builders, and again, with the county records as they stand right now, there is no record of who built what home. Again, every listing in MLRS says builder unknown. This is unfortunate, but I was told by folks at county records that not only did some of the records never transfer, but the county obviously in those 60 years, from the time these first homes were built to now, they went through a digital transition. And a lot of data was not entered from paper into the computer. And that's the end of that. There's history lost. Well, who's in charge here? At the pageant, not only did you have the builders, but you also had every company concerned with Paradise Hills. Well, you had Horizon Land Corporation, who owned the land. Then you had Paradise International Corporation. They managed all aspects of the development and was the grantee of the lots. Then you had Charles William Corporation, and they acted as a sales agent for the lots. Then you had Paradise Hills Golf Course, which was owned by Horizon Land Corporation and run by Paradise International Corporation under, doing business as Paradise Hills Country Club. The Country Club, however, legally was what's called a non-equity corporation. So if you paid to become a member of the Country Club, you had no ownership or stock rights. You basically got entrance onto the golf course and to the facilities as a member to play golf and to have dinner and to use the event room and the like. So that's all the players here in 1961 at the Pageant of Homes. One of the things that looked like a very positive item for growth for Paradise Hills was that nearby on Coors, two industries or two companies had opened up production facilities. One was called Curtiss-Wright and Spartan Southwest. One was Curtiss-Wright and the other was Spartan Southwest. Now, these were both companies involved with defense electronics, military electronics. And they are in the buildings of what now is Malloy Dodge and Harry H. Miller Chrysler Jeep. But it looked like, at least at some point, that one of the development points for Paradise Hills, which was an industrial park, would go forward. However, it didn't. These were the only two companies that built near Paradise Hills. There was one other thing, though, that was there from the year Horizon came in, and that was the 7-bar Alameda Airport. And that actually grew fairly well from 1959 to 1987, when it started as a dirt runway to two paved runways and a place for hangars and aircraft maintenance companies. That airport was there until 87, and in 1987, the land was sold, and what little is left of it can barely be seen around the Cottonwood Mall. Except for Rio Vista, growth around the golf course and in the knolls and in the estates, the executive estates, was extremely slow. Here you see a picture of the golf course from 1964. Many lots were sold, but there were only about 50 houses built, most of those on Simon, Columbus Circle, and Green Avenue. There were no houses yet on Justin or Ironwood, so it would seem like prime lots either went begging or were bought, but people were going to take their time to develop the lots. That's understandable. Maybe a lot of people from out of state came by, they bought their lot, and they were going to move here when they retired. That goes for a lot of people coming to New Mexico. Again, a slow growth. In the early years, obviously the golf course and the country club, they dominated life in Paradise Hills for the simple reason that for many years, if you bought a lot, you would get at least 1 year as a member of the country club. So the country club acted as a de facto civic association. They had meetings, they had parties, they had various events, and here we have a copy of the newsletter, the Paradise Hills Swinger, We have a copy from 1969, and it shows their Christmas party. Of course, Santa Claus was arriving in a golf cart. Wouldn't you know it? Again, some very nice stories about the people who originally lived here, those who had homes around the golf course. It was a little piece of suburban paradise. By 1970, more of the roads were paved, and there were more houses built around the golf course, but very few houses were built in the knolls past the original about 20 homes. And not much more building was done in the knolls until about 1978, several years after Horizon left. Growth in East Rio Vista was a little faster. Houses that were east of Unser, or Lyons, as it was back then, but not up against the golf course. That was a little quicker, probably because the lots and the homes are cheaper. But even in 1970, a lot of the northern lots around the golf course were not either sold yet or developed yet. Very, very slow. Well, I had to trace down the development of houses on Golf Course Road for reasons that become obvious. But there was building in the knolls from about 1962 to 1966. And as you look at advertisements for things like the Pageant of Homes, advertisements from Paradise International Corp., and other Paradise Hills advertisements from the early 60s, you can start putting together an interesting story. First of all, a lot of the lots along Golf Course Road were bought by one man. His name was Paul Jackson, and he was with a company called W.H. Pugh, which was an insurance firm in Albuquerque at the time. But the lots he bought were bought by him in name and not in the name of W.H. Pugh. However, by 1962, W.H. Pugh is advertising houses that look very much like some of the mid-century modern houses on Golf Course Road. So you've got Paul Jackson buying all these lots and then his company advertising the houses. Interesting events. However, in 1963, houses that look the same in terms of the description, 3 and 4 bedroom modern with dens and carpets and other amenities, these are advertised by a land called Alpine Land Company. No evidence of who they were. Definitely, there's a lot of Alpine Land Companies in the United States, but none in New Mexico anymore. And I'm beginning to think that somewhere along the line, W.H. Pugh had to surrender some properties, and Alpine Land became the dealer to get them sold. Now, this is because one of the original residents that I was able to talk to claims that her father, who actually bought a house in the Knolls, he was able to buy it because there was a default on a construction loan that had the houses go back to the S&L that gave out the loan. And of course, as we all know from what went on in a lot of the real estate busts in the last 30 years, banks do not like to hold real estate. And whatever S&L was holding the loan for the houses in the Knolls, they tried to get rid of them quickly. And that gave this original resident's dad an opportunity to buy a house cheap in the Knolls because he worked for an S&L that gave him a good deal. So again, you put all these things together and you start coming up with some story about W.H. Pugh, about Paul Jackson, and then about Alpine Land. And at this point, again, we've got a lot of lost history. The only documentation for W.H. Pugh that I could find, aside from the advertisement for the houses, was a order from a Xeon sign company in Albuquerque for a sign in 1959. It's funny, Xeon sign still exists. W.H. Pugh sure doesn't. My guess is that as an insurance company, they had some money and they decided to invest in lots and houses in Paradise Hills, and that went south on them. Now, the president of this company, Mr. W.H. Pugh, was a member of the Albuquerque Country Club, the Chamber of Commerce, and a board member of Citizens State Bank. And that was established only in July of '62. I'm wondering if Citizens State Bank was the company that folded on the loan or had the loan and folded. That way, at least W.H. Pugh would not go bankrupt, but maybe Citizens State Bank did. Oh well, what a tangled web we weave, huh? But a lot of history is long gone. I'm just trying to put together the pieces. But my gnawing question remains, who built these Paradise Hills mid-century modern houses? All of them along Golf Course Road and in other places on Green and on Fairfax. Very similar architectures, either flat or California pitch roofs, various floor plans, and a mix of either adobe and frame or cinder block, of all things, for structural walls, and also a use of modern decorative elements, including modern concrete decorative block. They were all probably part of this defaulted loan. Now, I'm not saying some of the houses didn't sell, but I'm wondering how many went with the bad loan. Again, one original resident I interviewed said her family was able to move into one of these houses because the bank gave them a good deal. So, again, just trying to put the pieces together. Of course, one of these houses is just for the sake of, taking a look and making assumptions. I would say this house, 9724 Golf Course Road, is the most Paradise Hills of Paradise Hills homes. Why is that? Well, look at the old Paradise Hills sign that was down at Paradise Boulevard and Coors. Then look at that house's butterfly roof. Well, you make your own deductions. I say that's the real Paradise Hills home. Slow growth keeps going from the 1960s to 1975. Very few records, again, very few things exist. Even in 1980, there were still lots to be had around the golf course. My guess is they were probably all bought, but not all of them had been developed. And at this point, again in 1980, there was a second development in the Knolls, but Horizon Corporation had gone already and had nothing to do with it. And in Rio Vista, there was, again, most of the lots had been sold and developed, but there were still some to be had. Here is a look at that second development in the Knolls. In the in your lower left corner are the houses on Academy and Golf Course that have been there for a good 20 to 15 years. And then at the upper edge of the photo is the development that followed in 78. That was probably the doing of Ed Black, who used to own Ed Black Chevrolet and was one of Albert Black's sons. I'm thinking maybe when Horizon left, he decided to buy back some of the land from the ranch and develop it himself. I have friends who live in that neighborhood, and he says that back in 78, Ed Black was a neighbor and nice guy, and they would go out drinking and shooting on the mesa. So that was Ed Black's friendly neighbor policy toward all the folks who bought a house up there. And again, here's Rio Vista, mostly built out, but still some lots available. And the western border there is La Paz. It's not out. It's nowhere near out to where Universe is. That would not be coming for many years still. But it is a section still west of Unser, then Lyons, and by 1980, a good portion of it was developed. Well, the last hurrah for Horizon was a big advertising pitch. We're going to sell, sell, sell. We've got to get rid of these lots. And back in the early 70s, as some of you may remember, the economy was not doing very well, and they just had to have a selling blitz that would be one for the ages. And believe me, it was. These are pages from an advertising brochure that Horizon put out in the early 70s. And of course, you have your typical celebrity endorsements by Merv Griffin there. And you have some pictures of what little industry there was in Paradise Hills in some of these pictures. Couples overlooking their new lots in Paradise Hills. And a fairly old photo of the Rio Vista Market and Shopping Center. Interesting stuff, but this was not just about Paradise Hills. This was about all of Horizon's developments throughout Arizona and Texas. They just had too many lots. The economy was turning down, and they had to do something. Well, they did something all right, but we'll get to that later. One thing I was able to come across were some typical documents from a lot sale back in 1969. And what you would get from Horizon, if you bought a lot, you would get the covenants, obviously. And then Horizon would send you your little coupon book for making payments on the lot. Most of you Gen Xer types and millennials have no concept of what a coupon book is. But you would get a small little book, and you would tear out each month a coupon from that book and mail it with your check to Horizon Corporation. You would also have some requirements from something that was acting like an HOA at the time, but it was just the way that Horizon was able to set up the covenants, because at the time when it owned most of the land in Paradise Hills, it was allowed to write covenants and get them ratified by Bernalillo County. Actually, when I bought a house in 1988, I received a copy of those covenants, even though it was not clear at all who would be enforcing them. And I can tell you right now, uh, no one's ever come to me to say do something different. Another thing you would get from Horizon would be a property visit credit certificate. This is interesting to me because it was basically something you would sign, and someone from Horizon would sign. And Horizon did have an office in Paradise Hills until 1975. And it would say, yes, I visited my property, it's as advertised, and I'm going to sign it. And that probably released Horizon from any liability. And they also would give you some, $115 toward your property, toward the price. This was again a way, I'm sure, for Horizon to get off the hook, and it was a way for the owner to get some money. But I wonder. I'm guessing that in some of Horizon's other developments, I wonder if this was offered as well. But it was offered in Paradise Hills for some time, and from what I can tell, most of the people who did buy land were satisfied with it, and that probably was because there was existing water and sewer utilities. Even if for some people it took another 6 months to a year to get electricity. All right, another interesting document I came across from 1969 was a required document from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, that would have to be given to out of state buyers. So if you were living out of state and you bought in Paradise Hills, you would basically get a property report or some sort of fact sheet. It would tell you about possible liens, taxes, if you had any mineral rights, what schools were there, what recreation facilities, what utilities were there already. And again, this was a requirement by law back in '69. It's probably still on the books now, would be my guess. Now, at this time, Horizon talked about, about 500 homes, one school, that being the elementary school, and it would mention the Rio Vista Plaza, which had the supermarket, barber shop, and some other stores. And except for the golf course, though, and this again is 1969, there are no proposed or partly completed facilities under construction by the developer. Also, no country club membership is offered, and it's basically Horizon telling HUD and HUD telling you that a lot of the stuff that was planned in 1960 does not exist and will not exist. Somewhere along the line, Horizon gave up the idea of a planned community, or they never really meant it. And we will never know because Joseph Timon is not here to ask. I was able to interview a man who we'll call James. He's 98, still alive, still in Paradise Hills, and he worked for Horizon for many years, from 1972 to 1977. And he told me that while he worked for Horizon, and this goes up to the point where Horizon left Paradise Hills, he was not aware of any problems going on. In fact, his only problems were pretty much with the contractors who were building in Paradise Hills and down near Berlin. He just didn't like the work they were doing. He found the job very frustrating, and he finally changed jobs into being a customer service rep, where instead of working with the contractors directly, he would just set up repairs that need to be made. again, it was 5 years, not the best of work, but again, he did not understand, or he had no concept that there were any issues going on with Horizon, or if there was a slowdown in the sale of the lots. All right, now another marketing scheme Horizon took on, besides handing out brochures to whoever take one, they started building homes themselves in Paradise Hills under a brand called Viva Homes by Horizon Corporation. Now, I've been able to go through two versions of this Viva document. It's fascinating. In 1969, there were several floor plans, the El Patio, the Horizon, the Granada, etc. And there were many styles. There was Pueblo style, Mediterranean, territorial, contemporary, modern ranch, just a bunch of different floor plans with different finishes. Were they beautiful, luxurious, and spacious, like the brochure said? Maybe back then. Did they have some substance to them? Yeah, from what I can see, they still look to be in fine condition here about 50 years out. One interesting exercise is to walk through both the Knolls and Country Club Estates to see where the Viva houses are. You go, you look around, and you match the pictures to the house, and you can see here on Academy Street a Sunlander and an El Patio. Then on Green we had the Monterey version of the Pueblo, and then on Fairfax we had a Monterey Territorial. So same floor plan, different finishes. However, looking at these houses, only about 20% of the houses in the neighborhood are Viva houses. And probably another 20% that you can tell by the architecture are probably Coda Roberson's work. So that leaves still a lot of houses for which we have no idea who the builder was. And in fact, for the Viva houses, it was probably a local construction company using Horizon's plan, but who that local construction company was is unknown. Well, in 1975, Horizon decides to pull out. Even back to 1971 and 1973, Horizon was calling Paradise Hills a bedroom community. The planned community concept had been completely abandoned. And that from 1973, I have a copy of one of their corporate magazines that states that right out. It's a bedroom community for Albuquerque. But in 75, they close their doors, they leave. And my guess is they sold whatever lots were left, they sold them wholesale to some other companies. Again, I think that's probably when Ed Black moved in and bought some of the land and decided to develop some of the land himself. Probably got it for a lot less than what they paid his dad for it. But from 1971 through that decade and on, Horizon came to a very bad end. Of course, in the early 70s, throughout the mid-70s, there were complaints, the usual complaints that a developer gets from both the owners and from the city. You're kicking up too much dust. You've got blasting going on in the executive estates that are rattling dishes. They were probably blasting into the escarpment. And then in 77, the quoted value of the lots were grossly overestimated from what the county had estimated. And so people were having a bad time selling lots in Paradise Hills for what Horizon told them they were worth. So there's a big clue to what's going to happen. Well, their marketing scheme backfired, and it backfired because it was pretty underhanded. They pushed these lots mostly down in Berlin, but some in Paradise Hills and some in Texas, they pushed these lots onto people who were nowhere near where the lots were being, where the lots were. They went overseas and on the East Coast, and they tried to sell the lots sight unseen. And this finally made its way to the Federal Trade Commission, the SEC. They just got story after story after story of people who bought lots, who were sold a bill of goods, and were just flabbergasted when they finally saw the lot, and how it had nothing to do with the advertising. The federal government probably got involved because a lot of those people were overseas service members. Horizon would go to the bases overseas, and that's where they would do a lot of their selling. One of my wife's former clients told us about how a friend of hers who was overseas in Germany in the late 70s was being sold a lot, or they were trying to sell her a lot, or sell him a lot rather, in Berlin. And they did their due diligence by calling a friend who lived in Albuquerque. They told them what Horizon said, and our acquaintance here in Albuquerque said she just laughed at them over the phone. What they're selling you doesn't exist. There's no water, there's no development, there's no roads, there's nothing there. And so at least those people were saved from a wasted $2,000. But again, these lots that still exist, they're worthless, especially the ones down near Berlin. There was a story done by Larry Barker, who is our KRQE investigative reporter. He did a report about 7 years ago called Rattlesnake Acres, A Tale of Deceit, Misrepresentation in the New Mexico Desert. And it's about a Horizon development that is worthless. They were even selling lots in arroyos. That's how bad Horizon got. And again, in the end, the Federal Trade Commission had to step in, and an administrative law judge found in 1979 that Horizon had perpetrated, as it's put in the court documents, a vicious consumer fraud. They sold $1 million of worthless land to unsuspecting consumers, and unsuspecting is because the advertisements were nothing, did not represent the land in any way. There would be pictures of people water skiing in the brochures. Now, isn't that funny? Well, during the 5-year period that the court basically ruled on, the court told Horizon they would have to pay about $40 million in improvements, rather $45 million, and they would have to pay $14.5 million to 40,000 buyers. Well, this ruling was enforced in 1981 by the Federal Trade Commission, and to say the least, I'm guessing immediately after that, Horizon filed for bankruptcy. They probably didn't have $2 million to their name at this point. And the commissioner at the time, the FTC commissioner, Patricia Bailey, who handled the case, she was just adamant about the fact that there would probably be no substantial improvements or development on any of these properties that were concerned around Berlin until maybe the year 2000. And here we are, it's 2025. And again, most of those lots in Berlin have nothing on them. There aren't even graded roads, not even graded dirt roads. So now Horizon Corporation is described as a foreign profit corporation from Tucson, Arizona, and the company is listed as inactive, involuntarily dissolved, which to me probably means they went bankrupt and they were foreclosed in a bankruptcy proceeding. So that's the very bad end. Horizon started out with this great version of a planned community and wound up a bankrupt swindler. So that's how I would put it. So let's take a look at Paradise Hills today. Well, as I said before, Paradise Hills is not a planned community. And we don't know if it was ever really meant to be or if it was just a big advertising scheme by Timon when he started all this back in 1960. First and foremost, let's remember Horizon was a land development company. It wasn't a construction firm, and it really was probably not going to be set up to run a planned community. They were there to buy land from the Black Ranch and sell it at a profit. How much profit they finally made is unknown. Again, so much of the knolls was undeveloped, probably not sold, and maybe they just had to pull out because they were going bankrupt too. Again, considering the advertising schemes they put forward in the 1970s, they were probably desperate and had to get rid of land. So good riddance to them when they went bankrupt. Now, what their relationship was with the various builders, that's still an open issue, almost a total unknown. We know Coda Roberson was involved quite a bit. Who else was there building houses around the golf course and in the knolls in the early days is still unknown. In terms of what was done by 1975, the only school built was Sierra Vista Elementary. That was probably funded by Bernalillo County and not done by Horizon. There was no senior housing, no high-rise apartments, no medical center, no community center. There was only the one small shopping center in Rio Vista. The golf course did well enough, but they never developed the riding stables, which was supposed to be part of the golf course country club. They did have some other things. It's interesting to note that they had a couple of large pools on the property for the country club members, but those pools were filled in a long time ago. Water in this part of the world is just so expensive that they just couldn't keep the pools going, and they were filled in. There were a few small neighborhood parks like the one on Globus Circle, but there was never a large 600-acre park. As we can see here in 1980, we've got the houses in around the golf course. Like I mentioned, we have the second build in the knolls. Lions Boulevard is simply still just through Paradise Hills. Unser has not come through yet. There is a park, a pool, and a community center at this point. But again, those were probably all built by Bernalillo County. I say probably, I'm almost 100% sure, again, that Horizon had nothing to do with it. Now, the one thing, though, that does make Paradise Hills special at this point is not so much what hasn't been done, but it's the simple fact that Paradise Hills is still in Bernalillo County. It's called a special zoning district. It's totally surrounded by Albuquerque, but as you can see here, what's in pink, this is the Paradise Hills Special Zoning District, and it pretty much includes the houses that were built up until about 1980, maybe 1978, but definitely into 1980. What happened was that in 1978, the Special Zoning District was established according to state law. But then in 1983, the city of Albuquerque came in and opposed some of the zoning changes in Paradise Hills. But a state court upheld that Paradise Hills was in its own zone and not part of Albuquerque. And since then, Albuquerque has probably decided it's not worth the effort to try to annex Paradise Hills from Bernalillo County. And that's where we are. And again, we're not in Albuquerque, we're in Bernalillo County here in Paradise Hills. But let's answer the basic question. Is Paradise Hills a failure? Well, you can look at it two ways. Yes, it is not the planned community Joe Timon advertised back in 1960. So much was left undone by 1975. I would say that's because it was overcome by events. OBE. The 70s was not a good time economically. People were not buying houses in New Mexico. People were not moving from somewhere else to Albuquerque. So it just failed because the times failed, and Horizon did not have the capital it needed to really set up the planned community. Of course, you can make the argument that no, Paradise Hills is not a failure. It simply became what was needed, which was another bedroom community for both Albuquerque and Rio Rancho. And think of it this way. It's very much like Los Lunas. There's a major artery connection between Los Lunas and Kirtland Air Force Base, which is on the southern side of Albuquerque, and between Kirtland Air Force Base and Paradise Hills. So you can think of it that way. They are both bedroom communities for people working on the base, and there are a lot of people who do that. Of course, Paradise Hills is a little closer to the center of Albuquerque, but still, it's just become a bedroom community. Here's a couple of examples of the yes and no. Here we have a picture from 1980 and 2024 of the lot that is on Irving and Golf Course. That lot, or at least most of it, still looks the same way it did back in 1980. And here we are 44 years later, and most of the lot is still just a big empty lot. There's been a little bit of commercial building on the south end of the lot, but still most of it's open. So Paradise Hills is still only being developed slowly in a way. There are more than enough houses, but very little industry, very little commercial use. And for no, here's a nice capture from Google Maps. This is Paradise Hills. You can see fairly well called out between Golf Course Road and La Paz, the original neighborhood. South of that is the Executive Estates. And then to the east is the Knolls, which today is known as Congress Heights. And it is part of Albuquerque. That part of the Knolls was annexed. But to the west, you have more development, more housing in Ventana Ranch and also in Paradise West. That's being developed too, along with Black Ranch and some of the other property south on Unser. So Paradise Hills just became what was needed. Didn't have to become a planned community. It simply became just another place for people to own their homes outside the urban sprawl. Well, maybe now it is urban sprawl. So my conclusion. Paradise Hills, it was a dream that could never be realized. Even if Mr. Timon was genuine about all this, rate of growth just didn't match what his dream was. And actually, I think the rate of growth of Albuquerque in the 1950s was more of a fluke because of Sandia Labs and the work in the state during the atomic age. And of course, there was the Air Force Weapons Laboratory that also did nuclear work. Growth in the 60s was good, but not great. And how could there be demand on the west side during the 1960s when there was still lots of open lots nearer to the base? Well, at least thanks to Albert Black, Paradise Hills did develop in something of a reasonable way. his demand for water and sewer utilities made it livable. So at least there was a fighting chance for people to go live out there. However, again, who wants to live out that far? Someone who an original resident out here described it as, we might as well have been taking a trip to the moon. So that to me that's very poignant. So those who did come for the remoteness and for the values of the homes they saw being built, but it still was not enough to keep Horizon around, and probably not enough to even keep Horizon in the black. So no planned community, and of course the changing economic conditions through the 70s and the 80s didn't help. Again, I moved into Paradise Hills in the late 1980s, just after Paseo del Norte opened. But the way it was in 1988 was exactly how it was in 1980, and very close to what it was in 1972. So almost no growth. But with the opening of Paseo, this place has just ballooned over the last 40 years. Every lot is full. Very few lots are unsold. I think all of them have an owner of some kind, but those lots are few and far between. So they're just waiting to be developed, what few lots are left. And of course, we are special because we're not in the queue. We're not in Albuquerque. We are still Bernalillo County and have the tax assessments to show for it. That's another reason why people do not want to move out of Paradise Hills, and everyone would love to move in. The west side, though, it continues to grow. Again, there are no open lots to speak of in Paradise Hills, but the west side grows and grows. Who's coming in? I don't know. And my final question, is that all there is? Well, it is for me. I've recently retired from my main profession, and I plan to live the rest of my life out here in Paradise Hills. So my appeal to my neighbors and for younger folks is, whatever Paradise Hills is going to be in the future, that's up to you. My only recommendation is get to know your neighbors. As I've found out in trying to find information on the history of this place, some of them are fascinating. So try to break the Gen X millennial curse and actually get outside your front door and get to know your neighbors. All right. I'd be more than happy to give you a slightly abridged version of this in PDF. If you email me, I'll be more than happy to send you a copy. Again, PDF of this presentation. At this point, I'm going to share some personal stories about Paradise Hills, especially my personal story, trying to find out, again, who built my house. Some of the people I have researched and some I've met make for interesting stories about Paradise Hills. The first person, and some of you may recognize the name, Dwayne Knight. He was head coach for men's golf at both UNM and UNLV. He grew up at 9915 Columbus Circle, right on the golf course. And then Paradise Hills is where he learned how to play golf. Problem with the Knights is that his parents passed away several years ago, and unfortunately the executor of the estate passed away soon after that, and a lot of the family records disappeared. So this is one unfortunate instance where a lot of history about Paradise Hills was lost. Next, I was able to talk to Ira Harge, who was a player for UNM, and he also played internationally. Ira and his wife lived in Paradise Hills from 1965 to 1968. They were very dedicated members of St. Jude Catholic Church, and Ira used to help set up the chairs when St. Jude's was in a temporary building. He was probably, from all accounts, he was probably the head of the first black family in Paradise Hills. Unfortunately, again, no photos or documentation remains. But he was a nice guy to talk to. A neighbor by the name of Billy Warner, he was my source for some of the Viva and Original Horizon Corporation documents. Funny thing about this was, after I donated those original documents to the Albuquerque Public Library Special Collections, I found the same set on eBay. And also in the set I found, I had a couple of copies of the Horizon Corporation magazine, New Horizons, that I mentioned before. And this, again, was an amazing time capsule of marketing. And it had all the Viva home floor plans and styles. So I do want to thank Billy for that. He also had in that package, here's a 1969 map that Horizon Corporation provided to prospective owners in Paradise Hills. And it shows the development and what was planned at that point. Of course, not much of that was built just yet. Another neighbor I met was a gentleman by the name of Nels Winkless. He moved into Paradise Hills in 1970. He was a resident on Simon Drive, and he took some pictures from the first day they arrived from California. And when his daughter was at UNM as an undergraduate in the late 1970s, she interviewed Albert Black. And that some of the information from that interview is cited in this presentation. And between her interviewing Albert Black and my interview of John Black, we got some very interesting history of the ranch. But unfortunately, Nels had the only pictures I could find of Paradise Hills going back that far. And you can see in the middle here, this is Paradise Boulevard in 1970, lined with all the poplar trees, which was a signature of Paradise Hills at the time. And on the right, you see the back of his house and the cedar weave fences. That was another signature of Paradise Hills. Practically everybody who had a house in Paradise Hills at that time had a cedar weave fence. I'm wondering if that was mandated by Horizon. Here are some other photos, and again, Nels was my only source for a photo of the old Paradise Hills sign that was at the end of Paradise Boulevard at Coors. Paradise Boulevard used to go down all the way to Coors, but now it terminates just around Eagle Ranch, and that sign is pretty much where the end support for the Paseo del Norte overpass over Coors is. So that sign was demolished many years ago. I got to speak to a lady by the name of Louise Moore. She was an original resident in Paradise Hills, and her father actually bought one of the mid-century modern homes on Golf Course Road. And from what she tells me, that home was bought in '62 for $28,000, which to me means that her father unfortunately paid full retail for it. So it may not have been one of the houses involved in the loan default, in the construction loan default. She has memories of her father playing on the golf course and how there was a big problem with tumbleweeds across the golf course. Her brother worked on the golf course and would come home dripping wet because they were always moving around the sprinklers for the greens and for the fairways, simply for the fact that they had not put in a fixed sprinkler system yet. She also, not only her, but some of the other original residents told me the story about Barney, the sheriff's deputy, who would be the guy patrolling Paradise Hills back in the early 60s, and how, of course, with the teenagers, it was a game to do things and not get caught by Barney, like sitting out on the mesa and drinking beer. Got to make sure that if you see the lights of Barney's car, you had to ditch the beer quick. She also told me about taking the bus to school, both for middle school and high school. They had to take a bus from Paradise Hills, quite some distance, because there was nothing local just yet. Here are some other pictures from inside the house, the backyard, and that is on top a picture looking from their front yard over to one of the other mid-century modern homes. It's interesting to see that there's some grass in the front yard, but my guess is that would not last very long. I talked to Dan McGrew, again, who was an original resident. His family had one of the first homes in Rio Vista, and Dan also was a pilot who learned to fly out of 7 Bar Alameda Airport. So his family lived again in Rio Vista. They were on Avenida La Barranca at 5840, and at that time, when they first moved in, their house was the last one, but that soon filled up to more of the street, up to Buena Vista, and of course these were all Coda Roberson homes. So there's another original person who I got to talk to. By the way, of course, you can always stop the video play and read through some of these slides yourself. There's a picture of Dan with his grandma. There's another picture of the homes in some homes in Rio Vista. He was I believe he says he was at Sierra Vista Elementary in the Army barracks, but that's all he could remember were the Army barracks. He was able to find some pictures of the Alameda Airport for me. These were found on an old airfields website that lists a lot of pictures and descriptions of these small municipal airfields that have come and gone over the years. In the lower right is a picture from 1996, and you can just make out north of Cottonwood Mall a little bit of the outline of the main runway. And again, the airport closed in '87, and the land was bought up to basically go ahead and build some more houses and for Cottonwood Mall. Here is some memories from Mark Pasnewski, who lived on Green Avenue for a time. And he actually lived on the one mid-century modern house on Green Avenue. That, again, as far as I can tell, was part of that failed S&L loan. And here are some memories of John Black. And again, the one thing John Black emphasized to me was that his family did have a pretty rough go of it trying to farm and ranch on the West Mesa. And that makes total sense because the West Mesa soil is very bad. There's some grass that grows, but a lot of it went quickly. And from people who moved into Paradise Hills in the early 60s, their memories of the knolls of Paradise Hills was much different from my memories when I moved in '88. Because when they moved in, the grass had been completely decimated by the cattle. But by 1988, The grass had grown very well, had grown back pretty well. And again, here's where my personal story comes in. Um, I moved into Golf Course Road in 1988 into one of the mid-century modern houses, and on the right there is what I had mentioned, that the open land in the knolls of Paradise Hills, and there was a lot of it. The grass had grown back very well. Even for the West Mesa, there was a lot of plant life. So it did recover. It took, who knows, probably took at least a decade to recover from the cattle, but it did recover. However, wouldn't be there for long after this, as Congress Heights was being developed. But when I moved in, it was pretty much the same as 1980. Golf course teed at Paradise with a stop sign. Golf Course Road did not go south of Paradise, and only in a most abbreviated fashion went up through Rio Rancho on a road that was very poorly graded and was very hilly, going up to Presbyterian Hospital. It was then St. Joseph's. Rio Vista Plaza still had the supermarket, but it wouldn't last much longer. The townhouses on Fairfax East were built, but were only a few years old. And Paseo del Norte, as I had mentioned, opened a week before we moved in. And of course, that opened the floodgates for people moving in to Paradise Hills and finally into Congress and Ventana Ranch. So, how do I answer my first simple question in May of 2024? Who built my house? Well, city and county records were useless. I first had Keller Williams, one of the local realtors, try and help me, and they did a good job at no charge for a friend, but they found nothing. And calls to the city and county did not yield anything. Again, they mentioned 6 decades and a transition to digital, so a lot of records were lost. They do not hold plans for houses in Bernalillo County either. Now, there were good places to search at UNM and through the newspapers. You know, you just put in Paradise Hills in the 1960s, and the newspapers are replete with advertisements about land and houses for sale. But I needed to find some original owners. Well, that would be a struggle because maybe there were more of them 20 years ago, but I've only heard of a few original owners that are still around, but none of them seem to be able to help me much. At least their families didn't want me talking to them because they didn't think their memories were that good. So I figured I'd have to search for their children and grandchildren. Now, how do you do that? Well, if you're going to go back to the 1960s, it's pretty darn easy. You go into the society pages where, again, in the 60s and through the early 80s, everyone would announce their engagements and their weddings. And of course, the Journal and the Tribune had society pages. So you search through those newspapers and you combine the words wedding and engagement with the names of streets. And wouldn't you know it, worked just fine. I was getting hits all over the place of people who lived in Paradise Hills on most of the major streets and names of the families that lived there in the 60s. Well, what do you know? Along the way, I find the Sackett sisters. I first find a wedding announcement from 1967 and then one from 1976, and those belong to Georgia Santa Maria Sackett and Marianne Sackett McKiernan. Sorry, Georgia Sackett Santa Maria, and again Marianne Sackett McKiernan, and they were original residents in my house on Golf Course Road. Well, of course, then I had an incentive to put my research into high gear, and I started finding things like the Sacketts, the mother and father's obits. However, in the mother's obit, there was no mention of Georgia. So I was wondering if Georgia had passed before her mother did. Um, then I searched for their grandchildren, and I found one of the Sackett's grandkids here in Albuquerque, and I talked to him directly. And he told me that actually Georgia was still around and would put me in contact with her. I did find, I should say before I go any further, I did find Mary Ann, and that's because she has a company in Denver that advertises on the net, and so finding her was fairly simple. But I was able to finally contact Georgia, and again, she lived in Albuquerque. I also was able to find some other things about Skip Sackett, the original owner, the stepdad of Georgia and Mary Ann's father, um, because he was one of the original balloon pilots at the first Albuquerque Balloon Fiesta at Coronado Center in '72. So again, neighbors can have some fascinating histories. All right, well, I was, like I said, able to track down both Georgia and Mary Ann. Georgia got married in '67 and had the reception in the house. And she did have pictures from that reception. Unfortunately, Marion didn't have any pictures from Paradise Hills, but at least Georgia did. And Georgia, uh, God bless her, she let me borrow the pictures. Of course, I scanned them in, tried to do a little color correction of old faded Eastman stock from the 1960s, and I started to put this story together of the houses on Golf Course Road. Now, from what Georgia told me, all the houses along Golf Course Road in the early '60s, they all had a very unique floor plan, each one of them. And Georgia's reception was in a large room called the atrium that was very much the center of a type of hacienda floor plan. However, the one thing that I was very surprised about was the fact that both Georgia and Marianne told me that the atrium was always enclosed. It was a large room bounded by four walls. However, you would say about three-quarters of those walls were exterior stucco, whereas the other quarter that was wrapping around this room was standard frame and stucco with wallboard on the interior, whereas the rest of the walls, those three-quarters, had exterior stucco in this room. Of course, my initial response to them was, no, you just don't remember when it was enclosed. But they're saying, yes, it was enclosed from day one. Well, that definitely got me thinking about what might have happened here. So they also tell me that their dad, Skip Sackett, father and stepfather, they told me that he was able to buy the house because the bank he worked for gave him a good deal on it. Well, that would seem to jive with the fact that it was first W.H. Pugh selling these houses, but then Alpine Land selling them. It makes sense to me in terms of a story to put together that Skip worked for whatever S&L had the houses after the loan defaulted, wanted to get rid of them, and one way they could get rid of them was increasing the floor size, the advertised floor size, by enclosing this large atrium, and from what I could research, some other large open areas in other houses along Golf Course Road. So even if the house was nice and it had this large open covered atrium, it probably looked nicer in an ad if we went from 2,100 square feet to 2,700 square feet. And in the pictures that Georgia gave me, again, it confirms that that room was enclosed, just like it was when I bought the house. The pictures from 1967 show the exact same room as it was in 1988. All right. Now, the Sacketts moved in Halloween week of 63. The younger daughter, Marianne, was sent off to trick or treat with some of the neighbors. They both have very distinct memories of the JFK assassination, which occurred just a few weeks later after they moved in. Both had good times hiking into the wilderness, which is what the petroglyphs were at that point. Now, Mom would not use the Rio Vista Market because she would drive down Coors to Central Avenue since the prices at the supermarkets were better there. Now, there were some trees on the property, including some poplars, which is the Paradise Hills signature. That tree was all over the place. And Barbara Sackett, Skip's wife, planted one ponderosa pine in front of the house that is still there. Now, I found things, this is interesting, I believe, I found things that the Sackett sisters were unaware of. And that was 2 advertisements to sell the house in 1965 and 1966. And if you read these advertisements, it's like Barbara is pleading to sell the house or to trade with one down in Albuquerque because Skip's commute was so long and he was on call 24 hours a day. Neither Georgia nor Marianne knew that their parents were trying to sell the house. And when they finally sold it, from what I can tell, it took about 3 years to sell the house during the early 70s. And again, with the way the economy was in the 1970s, starting with the Arab oil embargo in 73, one can imagine how tough it was to sell the house. But in 75, there was a transfer of the deed. But between the Sacketts and myself, there must have been at least 3 other owners that I could put together. So here's my story, and I'm sticking with it. You've got Paradise International. They have their great July pageant of homes. They sell several lots to one man, Paul R. Jackson. He Paradise International transfers the lots to him and his wife, and not to W.H. Pugh. And I think that was probably done to keep W.H. Pugh's name out of it, because if Paradise International got wind that there was another company coming in to develop the properties, they probably would have either told them to go sit on a tack or to up the price of the lots. So W.H. Pugh buys several lots in the Knolls. They build houses along Golf Course Road. Some of them sell, but others are on the market for over a year. And if anyone has any idea of what being a home builder is like, you cannot sit on a construction loan for a year. W.H. Pugh probably saw the writing on the wall and defaulted on the loan. So the houses that were built went back to the bank, whatever bank that was, I don't know. And that's when the bank wanted to try to sell the houses. It seems to me that the one thing they did was they enclosed some of the large open spaces in all of these mid-century modern homes to increase the floor space. Now, there are still some homes that retain the original floor space, but definitely the house I was in, it went from 2,100 square feet to 2,700 square feet, which is pretty much the size of the atrium when it's enclosed. So they did that. Alpine Land tried to sell what they could. And then finally, toward the end, the bank just said, Skip, do you want to buy a house? We'll give you a good price. And that's how the Sacketts were able to buy a house, fairly big house, in the Knolls of Paradise Hills. Now, here are my backup charts. And what I'll do is I'll simply scroll through them so you can take a look and read them for yourself. And at the end of the backup charts will be a poem that Georgia Sackett Santa Maria wrote. She's a poet, and it's about our meeting and life in Paradise Hills when she first moved in and what it's become. And then after that, I'll show you a music video that contains a lot of the pictures that I collected along the way, and with some, how should I put it, some appropriate "We Were Moving to the Moon" music from 1962. So here we go.
I wish I was a spaceman, the fastest guy alive. I'd fly you around the universe in Fireball XL5. Way out in space together, conquerors of the sky. My heart would be a fireball, a fireball. Every time I gazed into your starry eyes. We take the path to Jupiter, and maybe very soon we cruise along the Milky Way and land upon the moon. To a wonderland of stardust, we'd zoom our way to Mars. My heart would be a fireball, a fireball, 'cause you would be my Venus of the stars. But though I'm not a spaceman, famous and renowned, I'm just a guy that's down to earth with both feet on the ground. It's all imagination, I'll never reach the skies. My heart is still a fireball, a fireball. Every time I gaze